Hi, welcome to Better Your Chess, welcome to Supporter Game Analysis. My name is Waldemar Moes. Supporter of the day is Simon. Thank you, Simon, for sending in your game. We're going to take a look at the club competition game that was played last Thursday at Isolani Chess Club between Simon and Kees. Simon was playing with the white pieces. According to Stockfish, both players made exactly 4 inaccuracies and 2 blunders, so that's very funny. They held each other in balance, so to say. But let's try and find out who made the last mistake. Okay, here goes. So, Simon opened with e4. Kees chose for the French defense, d4, d5, and now the exchange variation, e takes d5, e takes d5. Of course, all of this is playable. It's maybe not the most ambitious approach to the French, but nobody less than Magnus Carlsen has played it on numerous occasions and was very successful with it. So bishop d3, that's also very normal. Knight f6, knight f3, bishop e7, they all look like very normal, plausible and solid developing moves from both sides. Castles, castles, h3, I suppose that move is also playable. Yeah, b6. Okay, this is, I don't know, somehow this move is a little bit more weird, because you would expect this bishop to be active on this diagonal. Somehow, somewhere, somewhen, over the rainbow. I don't know if the bishop is so well placed here on b7, if that is actually where Kees wants to develop his bishop, because of course it would be blocked in by its own center pawn on d5. Another idea here, of course, could be to develop maybe the bishop to a6 and then try an exchange of white's very well posted light squared bishop, and so try to get rid of the bishop on c8, which in many openings is normally a bit of a problem child. It has difficulty developing. I think you can also see that in this particular case. Of course, the h3 square is not accessible, the g4 square is not accessible, the f5 square is not accessible. The e6 square is playable, but you always have to keep in mind that you may get hit by a knight g5, for instance. The d7 square is not ideal, but I don't think it was maybe necessary to decide upon the position of the bishop so early on. Anyway, let's see how things continue. Bishop f4, also very natural development move. Bishop b7 is played now. Yeah, of course it was possible, I suppose, to play bishop a6 as well. Let's enter that as some sort of a sideline. And then I think there are 2 ways for white to continue. He can either maintain the tension with a move maybe like knight e5 and try to clamp down on the slightly weakened light squares as soon as this light squared bishop has left the board. Another way to play is then to say, okay, we'll trade bishops, but on my terms I'll just pull your knight to the edge of the board, and sooner or later this knight will have to move again. It's of course a target to white's queen, so that would also be quite decent for white to play. But bishop b7 was played. c3, I suppose that fits in very solidly with the position, but maybe it wasn't necessary to play such a slightly passive move. Maybe there was knight b to d2 or rook e1, stuff like that. Because if you don't have to play c3 immediately, if you don't have to react to some sort of attack, then why play it? Then I would normally prefer to develop a piece. And if there is one big advantage for the bishop on b7, is that it influences the e4 square. So it does strengthen black's control of the e4 square, so it also makes sense for white to try and play against the e4 square and make sure that black will not be able to plunk a knight on that central square. Okay, but c3 is played, and now knight b to d7. Yeah, knight b to d7. I suppose it's also a very normal move. But with the pawn on b6, it also makes a lot of sense to go c5 and then put this knight more actively on c6 from where it would be pressuring d4. And if it pressures d4, then it keeps this pawn and this knight honest. Maybe that's also a way to look for some counterplay for black. This knight b to d7, it does look a little bit passive, because, well, if the knight is on b7, where is it going from there? Especially with the pawn here and white's pawn being here, those squares are denied, and for the moment this knight is also sitting on the same trajectory. So both knights are fighting for the same squares. And if white is somehow in time to confront the knight on e4, then maybe it is difficult for this knight to ever follow up by jumping to f6. So those are some considerations, but not all of them too important for the result of this game. Knight bd2 was played now. That looks very natural indeed. And c5. c5 was played after all, yeah. But if you play c5, then probably you want to play it with the knight from b8 being able to go to c6, huh? Yeah. Because, of course, white isn't going to react. If he would give up the center, then, well, there are two decent options. First of all, black could play like this, and now he has two very nice dynamic central pawns, but I suppose he could also make use of his knight being on d7 and hit the target on d3, and from there jump to e4, and then all of a sudden all of black's pieces would be playing. Yes, he does have an isolated queen's pawn, but it feels like he has sufficient compensation with his piece activity. Anyways, so c5 was played. It seems that Case is mixing up the plans ever so slightly, but is it the end of the world? No. Rook e1, yes, why not? Very natural move. Now certainly knight e4 is not possible, and if knight e4 has trouble jumping, then where's the knight from d7 going, huh? But for the moment, black is sitting tight, and he's very solid. Rook c8 was now played. Rook c8 was now played, yeah. Rook e8 also looks very normal. So let's take a look at this move. Because we can see in the screen that this is an inaccuracy, and I'm trying to figure out why. It's very difficult to figure out why. Some things that I noticed, but they're probably not so important that now all of a sudden this pawn is unprotected. And of course the bishop is also unprotected, but it was already on the first move. Maybe white can make use of that situation with a timely queen a4. Is that going to be a move? Another thought that comes to mind, if the c file is not open, but the e file is, then probably you want to put the rook on the e file and not on the c file. Of course, black can try and open the c file, but if he does so, then he's relinquishing the tension, and if white recaptures, then where is this rook going, huh? Because all of the business squares are taken by white's pieces, so maybe the rook doesn't make too much sense on c8. It isn't really putting any pressure there. And if you want to get rid of white's pressure, who has a bit of a better position, then maybe you want to strive to exchange pieces, and then from that perspective, maybe the move rook f8 makes a little bit more sense, to try and somehow neutralize white, who is stronger on the e file. He's stronger on the e4 square, on the e5 square, and he may just double up on the e file if black is not careful, and then enjoy an advantage, I would say. But the other big advantage of rook e8, it would seem, is that you create a square for the knight. Yes, of course, all of this takes time, but you want to harmonize your position, right? And then this knight has a target, because then the bishop here is unprotected. And from g6, I suppose that knight would participate a little bit better in the game. So I'm guessing that's also an idea, yeah, of rook e8. Anyways, rook c8 was played. And now you would expect white maybe to not play queen c2, because then rook c8 makes sense. Then the queen would be in the line of fire from the rook. But why not say double the rooks, or put the knight on e5 in the center. Well, if you put the knight on e5 in the center, then you give this knight an opportunity to get rid of itself. But white would recapture with the e-pawn, and maybe now he has some dynamics on the king side. Because where's this knight going, huh? It can't jump forward. If it jumps backward, then that's very awkward. And already we can see that with a move like queen g4 and pieces piling up, you know, white may enjoy quite a nice initiative. But if black doesn't jump to e8, but he goes to d7, then maybe the same holds true. Also in that case, the queen could jump to the queen side, maybe to g4 again, threatening bishop h6, or to h5, threatening mate on h7. So, yeah, already white's pieces have more scope. But instead of that, I think that Simon now embarks on a faulty maneuver. He retreats the knight to f1. But this knight on f1 was guarding the e4 square. And maybe it's not the end of the world if black jumps into e4 now with his knight, which is a possibility, I suppose. But where does the knight go from here? What is his plan? If he goes here, then he's frustrating this bishop. And this bishop, I suppose, really wants to maintain a position on this diagonal and does not necessarily want to drop back to this diagonal. Yeah, it's all possible, but yeah, this maneuver seems to lose some time, so I think that's why Stockfish feels it's inaccurate and it's not really an improvement of the position since the knight was well placed on d2. Anyways, let's continue. Knight e4 is played. Knight e4 is played. Now knight e3 is played. Yeah. But this clogs up the e-file, right? This clogs up the e-file. There may be an idea, you know, just to put the knight here and hopefully win the dark squared bishop. And if the dark squared bishop would save itself and jump to f6, then knight d6 would be a nice fork, and then at least white would win one bishop. But isn't it quite simple to stop the knight from jumping to f5? You can do it with either f5 or g6, and f5 really solidifies the knight on e4, so f5 would make sense, and then the other knight can jump to f6. It would seem that with this intermezzo of knight f1 going to e3, that black has this small window of opportunity of improving his position. So f5 is probably the best move to play here. And play will continue. Very interesting struggle. But here he played knight f6, and this does allow knight f5. Did Case not see that white would trap his bishop? Or did Case not appreciate that bishops are normally worth more than knights? And that this is an excellent way forward for white, because the knight on e3 was just in the way. Now this knight can win this bishop, and when it does so, then the queen has to recapture, and then the queen is again vulnerable to the rook. And in general, white has two bishops, and this bishop is not so ideal. White would be very strong on the dark squares for the rest of the game. Maybe that will play an important role. Let's see. So of course Simon here takes the opportunity. He plays knight f5. Rook e8 is now played. Interesting. You can take the knight now. But Simon now decides first to disturb that rook that has become a new target to the bishop. Now you would think, is that so dangerous, because I can interpose with my quote-unquote bad bishop, right? Ah, yeah. But how about this move, chasing the other rook, which has now become a target on c8? You could still go there, and then you chase the bishop on c6 as well. Wow, just look at the piece activity white would have in this position. That would be very nice. Okay, let's suppose the bishop is safe. Now you can take both bishops if you want to. Yeah. Anyway, I suppose this would have been very nice for white to play. But Simon jumps in with the knight on f5, as we saw. Rook e8 was played, bishop b5, bishop c6. And now instead of going bishop a6, he goes knight e7 check, which is still a decent move, of course. But Stockfish thinks this is inaccurate because bishop a6 was even stronger. Yeah? You could pull the bow even more tighter, and then when you release the bow, the arrow will fly even further. Of course, this is also a decent arrow, but it's not quite bull's eye. Rook e7 recaptures. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But now Simon gives up his bishop pair. I don't think that is correct. No, you want to maintain the bishop, and you certainly don't want to exchange your good bishop for black's quote-unquote bad bishop. So this is inaccurate. Yeah, this is also for me quite easy to explain. I don't like this move. I think you should have just simply played either bishop a6 or maybe just bishop d3 back. That would also be very decent, and just take it from there. Yeah, because once again, those knights are on the same trajectory. We sometimes call them superfluous knights. That's normally considered to be a disadvantage for, in this case, black. This bishop is not ideal, and even though the knight on e4 is very strong, it is not permanently strong because e4 is not a permanent outpost. White can always, if he wants to dislodge that knight, contest that e4 square, or rather just take away that e4 square from the knights. Let's suppose this knight would have to jump back, and then this pawn would defend against both knights. And of course it would open up the bishop again towards h7, etc. etc. But okay, bishop takes c6 was played. So this is explaining most of the inaccuracies, is that piece play is not so precise as it could have been, and exchanges. Rook to c6. Now black's position is looking up because white no longer has the bishop pair. He no longer black no longer has this bishop from b7 or c6. His knights are now in decent positions. The rook can maybe double up, who knows? Black can even create Alekhine gun on the e-file. And maybe there is another attacking idea. I could also envisage a move like knight h5 and rook g6, and look at the pressure piling up on white's position instead of black's position. But we're nowhere near yet. Knight e5 is played. I suppose that also makes sense, hitting the rook. But the rook just piles up on the e-file. Yeah. And also the e5 square is, of course, never a permanent outpost. Because certainly with the absence of the light-squared bishops, I suppose it makes more sense to play the light-squared pawn from f7 to f6 and contest the e5 square sooner or later. But now Simon is going to try and do something similar. So he's also piling up on e3. I suppose that also makes sense. I've said that a number of times now during this video analysis. Knight d7. Knight d7. Yeah. Well, queen e8. Queen e8 was probably also possible. Yeah. Anyways, knight d7. Excuse me. But Stockfish again thinks that this is an inaccuracy. So why is this inaccurate? Well, in chess we always have to look at targets. For the moment, the knight on e4 is protected twice and only attacked once. If you play this move, you retreat the knight, and you're not really threatening the knight on e5. Maybe with the f-pawn. Maybe that's an... Oh, but wait a second. Isn't there just knight c6 here? No, of course not. My apologies. Rooks are allowed to move laterally. I just thought for a moment there was a fork. But let's take a look at this knight. I think this knight and the pawn are both targets. Yes, they're both targets. So how can I make use of that? c4 is a very interesting try. Of course, if you take that, then there's no more defense of the knight, huh? But if you don't take that, I'm going to take, and then I'm going to take your knight. But the interesting thing is now what happens here after the counterattack. Now, what happens if just players decide to ignore each other and just go on their own rampage? So we take here. So we both took an enemy pawn. But if we take this rook, then we can take this rook, and this knight is hanging. Which means you have to defend? No, you can interpose with check. Oh, this is very interesting, but difficult. Okay, but we can see now that the queen is in trouble. Okay, so here, white would actually win a piece. Something like this, and then something like this. Yeah, okay, and he would win the game. That is interesting, yeah. So c4 is still holding up, but I don't think we saw all the lines of the counterattack. C takes d4, c takes d5, takes the rook, or was there, no, here there's a way to sidestep that line we just saw. How about playing a desperado? If I'm going to lose my rook, I might as well just sacrifice it. And then if white recaptures like this, then we take back the rook, and in the process we won a piece. So white can't recapture on e5, but he can play this. But he's down a piece for the moment. But the problem is the rook on e5 is trapped. And the knight on e4 is weak. Where to with the rook? Let's say this. And then if nothing else, I suppose I can take here, yeah. Well, exciting lines. But instead of, maintaining the tension, this happens so often in games played on our level, we relinquish the tension. Simon now plays another inaccuracy. He takes this knight. He gives up his centralized knight for the knight that was on d7. And he opens up the e-file where, who knows, maybe black is better prepared. So now it's bishop versus knight, but those heavy pieces on the e-file, they favor black. Black is faster. And, white may also be in danger of ending up in a technically bad bishop versus knight position, because his pawns are on dark squares, and his bishop is also on dark squares. And this knight is, of course, for the moment, a beauty. So queen d7 was played. And now he opens up to get some counterplay against the d5 pawn. I suppose that makes sense. Also, when you have bishop versus knight, maybe to create imbalances in the pawn structures is also a good idea. Black recaptures, position remains very tense. And now one of the blunders. I'm trying to figure out why this is a blunder. The queen is protected on g4. We have to take a look at targets, yeah? The queen can be attacked by the pawn, the h-pawn or the f-pawn, but that doesn't seem to be a problem. Can also be attacked by knight f6 back. So this one is in trouble. This one can also be protected or attacked by the pawn on g5, but for the moment that pawn would be pinned. The rook is also in danger. d5, d4, d3, d2, d1. Okay. But the funny thing is, I don't really understand why this would be a blunder immediately. I mean, double exclamation mark. Sometimes it's also a blunder because then you miss an opportunity. According to Stockfish, this would have been the best move, which confronts the knight. If the knight jumps back, then maybe you can just sort of hold on, bring the other rook into the game. Yeah, the knight is of course very nicely placed in the center. You should probably play against it. But why this move is so horrible? Stockfish suggests now the very implausible h6. Does it also have to do with something like this? I don't know. So what's the threat then after? The threat seems to be g5 after h6. So it has to do with playing against those pieces. Let's make a nothing move and execute that threat. The bishop is a little bit trapped. Let's say we just bring it all the way back. No, okay, this is too difficult for me. Somehow it's a combination of playing against the bishop and against the rook. Of course, this pawn is incredibly strong. We understand that. Ah, okay. Yeah, now that since the rook a1 is not playing and the bishop on f4 is no longer protecting the rook on e3, and the queen was always a target to the knight, now this move is possible. Yeah, because this is a double hit and this is a double hit. Yeah. So, okay, very difficult to see. We can understand that black has pressure, but how he has to make use of this pressure after queen g4 is very difficult to see. So, okay, mathematically a blunder probably. Yeah. But difficult. And Case decides to attack another target. He goes queen b7. Stockfish thinks it's not best because he misses this opportunity of playing against the bishop with h6, g5 and so on. And here queen e2 was played, and that is again a blunder. Well, let's try and attack the bishop again. Now this g-pawn is not pinned. The bishop cannot move forward. We cannot play this for obvious reasons, because the knight takes and there is no proper answer here anymore, because the knight's also hitting the queen. So you have to go to h2. That's quite easy to figure out. But then still, with the queen also in the e-file, here knight f2 doesn't work because of rook e6 in between. The knight is not hitting the rook. But d4 is then a strong idea, very strong idea. You could take, and now where does the rook go? Let's play a counterattack. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's centralize. Now the knight is threatening maybe some knight c5 move, knight g3 move, and this pawn, yeah, this pressure, and this bishop that is playing absolutely no role in the center there. I can understand that this is a winning position for white. Yeah. Okay, so g5 would have been the correct way to start, just to dislodge the bishop. But a case starts now with d4. And that apparently is insufficient because the bishop maintains his position. Takes, counterattacks. Oh no, not rook b6. Why would you give up this? Because otherwise rook b8. That's also the big difference. That's the big difference. If you play g5 here, your king has an escape square, of course. Yeah, so it's not just about dislodging the bishop, but also creating the escape square. We're getting there. So d4 is clearly less strong. It doesn't have those two advantages of dislodging the bishop and creating an escape square. Attacks. I would never really want to play rook b6. I would like to maintain those two rooks, but you don't really want to allow rook b8. You still would have to retreat rook e8, and there would be an exchange of rooks anyway. So now I understand that rook b6 is better. Takes, recaptures. But here it's white's move. There's not so much pressure on the e-file anymore. The rook on e7 is now unprotected. The knight on e4 can be hit by the f-pawn. The b2 pawn is safe for the moment. The bishop is still in that position. White can make a rook move, for instance. There's not a dangerous discovery with the knight, because the rook on e7 is loose. Yeah, so also in this phase, both players missed the ideal opportunities. But chess is difficult, you know? So rook d1 or rook c1 is played by Simon. Yeah, why not? Just try and mate black on the back rank here. So white has made some luft for his king, yeah? Maybe it is high time for black to do the same. High time to do the same with a move like h6. Makes a lot of sense, but he plays rook e8. But here, the rook is still unprotected. Yeah, this is a big accident. Queen e4. And black resigns. You can't recapture, because there is still a back rank problem. So it's black who makes the final mistake here. He has to figure out where he is weak. He's weak here, he's weak here, he's weak here on the back rank. He needs to address those issues. He thought, I'll address two of those issues by playing rook e8. But this time the rook is overworked. It has to guard both the knight and the back rank. I remember looking at this position and trying to figure out what black was supposed to play on that club evening. I thought maybe g5 would be interesting. According to the computer, that's not best. h6 is best. But this just looked very interesting. You would hit the bishop. Maybe you would still play with ideas of attacking f2 in combination with d3. You would create some space for your king. But let's figure this one out. What happens after g5? The computer suggests check, and now the king goes up, and there is a similar problem here. There is still a problem on the e file. You can just take this bishop pawn, because there's no way to retreat, to recapture, I mean, because that would again lose the loose rook. So let's not take. But then we would like to try this counterattack. This is difficult. This is difficult to calculate, because according again to the computer, the only winning move is queen g4. But you would not allow this so quickly, right? You would have to figure out that the king is completely safe here. So you would have to need to have a good stomach, be very cold-blooded, and realize that actually here it's black who is still in way more trouble than white. And of course there's trouble here, there's trouble here. The pawn isn't really dangerous because white's threats are way more serious and white's king is safe. Yeah, okay, so g5 in the end would not have been a good move. But h6, more prudent, would have solved all the problems. Would it? Because we can still take a look now at this attack. If the knight moves, then you can take the rook, but of course I would think this check would be possible. And you cannot take the knight because you need to fix the check. And you're hitting the queen, but the queen could still go in between, yeah. So this would be one way to play for black, and then just put the knight somewhere, maybe to attack the bishop on e3, some sort of discovery with the knight, yeah. There also seems to be another opportunity after f3. You can counter-attack the bishop that is loose on f4. Maybe that's also quite a secure way to play. At least you would be protecting the rook. Solve your problems like this. You cannot take the knight with the queen, and if you take it with the pawn, then black maintains the balance like this. Who knows, maybe he's even a little bit better still with this pawn. Okay, well, I suppose that's it for this supported game analysis. Congratulations to Simon for not making the last mistake and winning the game. Well, you know the drill. If you've come this far, please subscribe to the video, smash that like button, comment on the game below. Do you also want your game analyzed? Then go to the description below the video and read all the necessary information. Thanks for your attention. See you in the next video, and don't forget, better your chess.